Welcome to the Dose of Optimism, where I talk to the optimists in healthcare. My name is Omkar Kulkarni, and I work at one of the world's best children's hospitals, where I lead innovation. I started KidsX, which is a premier international startup accelerator for pediatric innovation, and over the years, I've met thousands of startups, investors, and innovators. Every one of them has a story, and every one of them is optimistic about the problems they're solving. On this podcast, you'll meet amazing people who will share their stories and what makes them optimistic about the future of healthcare. A little note before we get into this episode. This podcast is for informational purposes only. We are not offering medical advice, and we're not endorsing any products. Please talk to your own physician about your health or the health of your children. All right, let's get started. We're entering the holiday season. This week is Thanksgiving here in America, and one of the things I'm most grateful for is the health of my family. I'm reminded, though, that for many families, it can be a sudden, unexpected, traumatic twist when their child goes from being happy, healthy, and otherwise living a normal life to suddenly being jolted by the diagnosis of a serious illness. The resilience of the parents, the siblings, and of the children through these moments gives me so much inspiration. And further, I love talking to parents and children who use these experiences of pediatric illness to innovate and build solutions that will help others going through similar journeys. We're calling this segment the Mighty Parentrepreneurs, parents who were so inspired by their experiences that they decided to funnel that energy into building and sharing solutions that will help future children and families who are going through the same thing. These parents are often not seeking the billion-dollar acquisition or the hockey stick growth that so many other startups thrive for. Instead, their drive is one of impact and helping others. Today, I talk to two inspiring individuals whose stories give me both perspective and, of course, optimism. First is Aubrey Kelly. I've known her for many years, and the videos online about her son, Fierce Pierce, and their journey at Children's Hospital Los Angeles are an incredible reminder of the power of hope and perseverance in the face of adversity. First of all, thank you for being here.
Of course.
It is so nice to be able to talk to you. Tell us your story with your family. Were you deeply engaged with pediatric healthcare before that?
So I have a background in biopharma. I used to work in protein sciences, sequencing DNA, and then I moved into the clinical trials and streamlining clinical trials and negotiating clinical site budgets and spent close to 15 years of my professional career a little bit like a chicken with his head cut off in terms of just understanding biopharma, clinical trials, regulatory, publishing, program management, et cetera. And I had the opportunity of working with a number of different disease states. So I worked in bone health for a number of years, cardiology, I worked in a little bit in oncology, and absolutely loved it. Loved the kind of intersection of how we can bring new and effective medicines to more people. I found that incredibly inspiring. And so that was my background. And then in 2017, my 22-month-old got sick. He went from single ear infection to bronchitis the next week, back to a double ear infection. And we thought that was very strange. And at the same time, while all this was happening, I had a 4.5-year-old and a 4-week-old. So I'm like, I'm in like the
I
postpartum.
didn't realize your youngest was so young at the time.
Oh yeah, she was newborn, and so, like, you're not quite in your right mind when you're just a few weeks bringing a new kiddo home, and so Pierce was really sick, but we were trying, I was obviously a lot of hormones probably pumping through my body, trying to figure stuff out and nursing and the whole thing, and we collectively, with this local pediatrician, we live up in Thousand Oaks, decided to do some lab work, and it was at that point where I felt so fortunate that CHLA was so close to us and that our local specialty hospital was and is Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And after the lab work, we found out in this kind of just I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like your life will be forever changed on this day. And the words that you hear, you will be going via ambulance to Children's Hospital Los Angeles for possible diagnosis of leukemia lymphoma. And I don't think I'll ever forget this. She said that we're going to go meet an oncolytic doctor. And I'm like, oncolytic, how do I know that word? Oh, oncology. Boom. Right? And so it's this really strange kind of paradigm where professionally I'm very comfortable with the research and the working with physicians and working with hospitals and working together to figure out what works for patients. And then here we are experiencing it.
Because you know enough and you can understand it and it helps you learn, but you don't know everything,
Absolutely.
right? So, like, how was that experience for you?
I think that's really important, right? I think it's also probably worth mentioning that my husband also has a very similar background. We had connections in the biopharma world. We had access to VP of oncologies. We had access to a ton of people who are tremendous individuals, right? They're wicked, wicked smart. The brain power behind these individuals, it's incredibly humbling. And so when we found out that Pierce, my son, was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, that weekend we were on the phone with a VP of oncology at Amgen who we were employed by. And I recognize that not everyone has that kind of access to people who can help you navigate. And I think that's a really important piece, right? We're not your typical parents, but at the same time, what I learned from Pierce's journey is that we get to be really specific around what we have control over and what we don't have control over. If you have something that's really questionable and you go into this brand new diagnosis, you suddenly have a thirst for relevant information in a short period of time, packaged in a certain way so that you can understand. I fully recognize that we were at a complete advantage compared to other parents, but our world was rocked and we still had so much information that we wanted to learn about and be engaged and ask questions and come to the decision around his treatment that was within our understanding of what was going on. And at the same time, recognizing that it's trauma, right? And it was a good day if I remembered to brush my teeth. That I'm now living at a children's hospital with an infant and a kid with cancer. And that experience just really resonated with me of knowing that I was privileged in terms of who our network was, the type of insurance that we had, et cetera, but also very clearly remembering that I found an immediate need and desire to tap into other parents that have gone through something similar. And how could I find that? So not only are the kids going through trauma, and I think this is a really important kind of piece as well, but I had to go get diagnosed for me personally, not my kid, for me to get disability from my employer.
So,
Super specific, random, but I want to pull this thread because it's an important one. So I went to my primary care physician, and this is after I had been in the hospital and lived in the hospital for a few weeks now. So I'm settling in a little bit, getting into that mode of acceptance, but not quite there. And I went to my primary care physician and I ended up going and seeing a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed with acute situational depression and acute situational anxiety. I was like, "Hey, my maternity leave is running out.
yeah.
I can't go back to work. I gotta figure out, like, what's happening." I remember coming back to the nurses station and just saying, "This is wild to me that not only are you guys supporting very sick kids, but you're dealing with parents and we're all whether or not we're diagnosed, I can pretty much guarantee that all of us are walking around with acute situational depression and acute situational anxiety or some flavor of that." And I just had tremendous respect for the care team, but also recognizing that I needed some tools at my disposal to connect, to deal with that trauma, to understand what that looks like so that I could start being the mom that I wanted to be for my kid.
I've
On
thought about this a
space.
lot, and it's thank you for bringing it up and sharing. You were already on leave, and I'm curious if it was a different moment where you were perhaps working a normal schedule, if you would have gotten to that point of going to your PCP. I think what you did and what you described, and I'm so glad you did, getting treatment and getting help for what you were going through. I don't know if the majority of parents who have children in children's hospitals do that or
Right.
think to do that. I imagine they're so focused on whatever they're having to do for the child who's in the hospital. I don't know if many parents are able to get diagnosed and help that they need because there's not systems to do that, right? For children's hospital,
Right.
we're not your provider. So we are not able to refer you to go do it. We can maybe there's suggestions to do it, but there's not necessarily a pathway.
I'll disclose the rationale as to why I did that. It wasn't for me. Honestly, my motivator behind it was I wanted to be at the hospital. I wanted to care for him. And I felt guilty going to my PCP and leaving him at the hospital with either my mom or my husband. I did it because I needed short and long term disability. And so I think that there's another aspect there of you're in this trauma space. Most of us aren't thinking about how to help ourselves, even though that ultimately helps the patient. But there's also avenues to address financial toxicity and relief programs, but you have to take some steps to be able to do that.
And for our audience, Pierce is doing well.
He's doing well. He hits his 8-year remission mark this year, which we're
That's wonderful.
we're very
Very
fortunate. Yeah. He's doing great. He had a successful bone marrow transplant. He's had his own crazy journey. And yet, coming from a biopharma background, I saw a lot of kids who are no longer with us and a lot of families who are no longer with us. And the background that I have is one where we give medicine, we create medicines, and we run clinical trials, and we try to give more hope. And so, coming back to work for me, the turning point for me in leaving and starting my own company was I was at an advocacy conference where a nurse got up and said that on average, it takes 15 years for new medicines to reach 14% of eligible patients. I want to just hone in on that because it takes too long to bring new medicines. And the medicines, once they are in market, aren't reaching the right patients. And I just felt like there was a need for a digital health company to be able to recognize that and recognize all of the different facets that take place on the right patient at the right time. What if there was a digital health company that had an app specifically designed for patients and for caregivers outside of a health system, outside of a health plan, outside of a pharma company that could really start to hone in on those specific measures? And I felt after that conference that I was gonna try to do something about it, and good, bad, or indifferent, I called my husband and said, "I really feel like we need to do this," and I feel so honored and blessed that that decision was over 4.5 years ago, and we still have Rabble Health. We're still chugging along.
You mentioned shared decision making, and I've loved thinking about this space for a while and seen different iterations of how you can solve for it. I would love to understand what it means to you, if you can even perhaps tie it back to your experience and what digital health can do to help with shared decision making.
To me, shared decision making is really throughout any patient journey, there are critical decision points throughout the entire journey, right? It's treatment decision making, it's diagnostic decision making, it's are you at the right health center? Are you equipped with the right information that you need to take the next step forward? It's influenced by results on labs, results on data, outcomes of surgeries, advancements of science, etc. And shared decision making to me is really a matter of the goals and aims and ability of the patient in the children's hospitals. It's often the parent. How do they want to be involved, and how are they involved in the key decisions along the progression of a patient journey? And there's a tremendous amount of technologies that are also available on the provider side in terms of there's clinical decision support tools and others. But on the patient side, I didn't see a whole lot of advanced technologies that are available to help parents, in the case of children's hospitals, navigate. How do we get connected to other parents that have experienced a similar type of diagnosis? How do I, as a parent of a toddler who had a bone marrow transplant, navigate my post traumatic stress and give back in a way that's meaningful? And how can I actually help other people that are going through something similar? How do we learn about clinical trials? How do we learn about biomarker testing? How can I suddenly get involved in a very technical space and try to understand genetic testing? And the beauty of it is that if we have the technologies and we have the right training, I think, to help both patients and parents and caregivers and providers, we're all better for it, right?
One of the decisions that I imagine a lot of families go through is around clinical trials. I've seen technology that can help families just be aware of the different clinical trials that are out there. Just that amplified search function is really valuable because it's not easy. And there are many
You know,
clinical trials that go unfilled. The stat you described as to how long it takes for treatment to reach populations is largely influenced by trials that are not properly and quickly filled. And there's lots of motivations for lots of people to get these trials properly done and properly started. But beyond the finding a trial, I imagine lots of parents have questions about, is this the right trial? Because often for kids, it may involve moving your family to a different state, which could be very disruptive for a child and siblings and whatnot. How do you think digital tools play a role in that part of shared decision making as it relates to clinical trial knowledge, awareness, but also then decision making?
I think of on the health system side, the clinical trial recruitment piece is an absolute barrier, right? It's like, how do we find more patients faster? On the patient side, you may or may not be thinking about clinical trials, right? And the clinical trial learning journey doesn't start at all with clinical trials, right? It starts with, do I understand the diagnosis? Do I understand the options? Do I know what clinical trials are? Do I consider clinical trials? Which clinical trials are right for me? What are my parameters when considering a clinical trial, right? So that clinical trial learning journey is critical to get right. And that's a critical part of shared decision making. And the piece about that too is that it's not only a clinical trial learning journey, but it's applied at a very specific point within an individual patient's journey, right? It's often right after diagnosis or relapse or kind of other critical parts. And so I share this because I often think that clinical trial recruitment and some of the tactics right now for clinical trial recruitment where it's like, hey, we've got the study for asthma patients, come check it out, social media, etc., that doesn't actually support the right patient at the right time with the right information. And so digital health has an opportunity to rethink that clinical trial learning journey and get super specific around performance measures, around screening rates, etc., but start co-creating that digital experience again with patients and with parents around what are the key decision points that you want to have answered at what point, and ultimately how can we help more people that might be eligible for a clinical trial learn about their importance, be open to it. And if the barrier is less about the specific clinical trial and more of just not even understanding what they are, then we should probably start there.
You've taken all your expertise and experience professionally and then added to that the experience that you had as a parent going through a very specific oncology experience to then build this product. Thank you, Aubrey. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and inspiring us to think about how we can make the journey better for patients and also the people that are part of their shared decision making process.
My pleasure. Thanks, Simkar.
And now a thank you to our generous sponsors.
All right, we want to thank our sponsors for a dose of optimism. Our first sponsor is Nabla. Nabla, this will help keep us practicing longer. For 85,000 clinicians and counting, Nabla is the key to better balance. With real-time notes and dictation in one platform, clinicians are saving hours on documentation time and strengthening patient satisfaction. Learn more on nabla.com. And to Mercury Bank, online business banking for startups and small businesses. Go to Mercury Bank for powerful banking, simplified finances. And finally, we want to thank our presenting sponsor, KidsX. KidsX is a global ecosystem of pediatric innovators anchored by a consortium of the leading children's hospitals motivated to accelerate health innovation and transform care in pediatrics. In 2019, I was scrolling through my newsfeed, and I came across a story about an incredible girl, middle school age, who came up with an invention in response to her own experience as a patient in a Connecticut hospital. I met with Ella and her mom and learned about their amazing story and found ways to help them advance their journey. A few weeks ago, I caught up with Ella, who's now in college, about her invention, Medi-Teddy. Ella, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What brought you to inventing this product?
So, when I was 7, I was diagnosed with a platelet disorder called ITP. And so at the time, I was having to get IV infusions every 6 to 8 weeks. And during that time, I was just a little elementary schooler sitting underneath these big bags of medication and blood product. And I would see other kids getting chemo infused bags that say poison and just looked pretty scary. And I think, especially for a little kid, it's just the thought that all that medicine is going inside of you, that can be really intimidating. So in fifth grade, I had to come up with an invention for a school project. It was called the Invention Convention. And that's sort of where the idea stemmed from and what prompted me to first create it. So I made the first prototype for that school project.
So then tell us what it is. You saw the problem, which was that these bags of IV medication that are hanging in hospital rooms could be scary for a child. So what was your first invention?
So Medi-Teddy is the original version was plush. The version that we have now is made out of silicone, but it's basically an IV bag cover. So it goes over the IV bag. The rear is fully open so that caretakers can still easily monitor the medication. But this way, instead of the patient seeing the big bag of medicine, they see what looks like a teddy bear. And with the silicone version, caretakers or the patients themselves can write on the Medi-Teddy's tummy, write messages, draw pictures, things like that. And it was interesting at first, before I'd even invented Medi-Teddy, I would see some nurses and child life specialists try to tape paper towels over the bags of medicine, which worked to conceal it, but wasn't a good long-term solution, still didn't look that nice. This works in the way that it not only conceals the medication, but also through the back, exactly like you said, the nurses, doctors, child life specialists can still monitor the medication.
Okay, so you built one. What happened next? It seems like you at some point decided to turn this into a company.
Yeah. So it's funny. The first one that I ever created, I was 12 years old and I took a stuffed penguin in my room, cut out the back, pulled some of the stuffing out, and used my mom's sewing kit and sort of stitched a very, very rudimentary first prototype. Didn't look that great, but I got a lot of really good feedback from my nurses who I showed it to and from my teachers in the school. I ended up going pretty far in the invention competition that it was a part of. And so I was kind of like, okay, if this got such great feedback, maybe this is something that I could actually continue with and that could actually work to benefit patients. When I got to middle school, I was in the school gifted program and we had an independent project and we basically got to work on whatever we wanted. And that's when I really decided, okay, I have this idea now. I really believe I could take this to the next step. This is a great opportunity to do that. So that's where I really started to build out the pieces of the puzzle and start working towards making it into a business.
Okay, so tell us about that business. So from an eighth grader to now, in the last 4, 5, 6 years, what have you done? How have you grown the business, or how did you even start selling it? And who do you sell it to?
It started with filing for patents. When I was in seventh grade, this was when I first told my parents, I think I want to take Medi-Teddy to the next step. And they were kind of like, okay, didn't really think much of it. So then I made a business plan and built a marketing video. And I took it to them and was just like, look, here's my idea. Like, I think this could kind of be something like, was just a kid, really had no idea what I was doing, but I really did believe in my idea. And they were kind of just, okay, you can take your idea to a man in my hometown who owns a nonprofit and also owns a local ice cream shop. Take your idea to him, pitch him, see what he says. So I walked into his ice cream shop with my laptop and showed him my business plan, told him about my idea, and he said, okay, well, what you need to do is get this patented and find someone to actually manufacture it, see if this can actually be made. So I was in eighth grade by now. I started filing for the first patent and then basically just emailed a whole bunch of manufacturers. The first one who got back to us was New England Toy Company. His name is Josh. And we just kind of went back and forth on different prototypes. And I sent him a sketch of my idea, and he sent me a prototype back. And I think the first issue is okay, the mesh back is too small. This is never going to fit an IV bag. So kind of just gathered feedback.
You're in middle school at this point, right?
Yes, eighth grade.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Just kind of went back and forth with those different prototypes. I think we went through 4 or 5 until I actually found one that I thought could work. And then he was like, "Okay, well, now you need to place a minimum order." And the minimum order was 500, and that would cost $5,000. So I started a GoFundMe, and it's funny when my mom talks about it, and honestly, what I thought too at first is that, okay, we'd get 500 of these made and maybe like have them in the back of our car, be like driving around to different hospitals trying to find child life specialists to try them out. But the GoFundMe actually ended up going viral, and we raised over $20,000, ended up being picked up by a bunch of different news outlets, and we started getting requests for Medi-Teddys from hundreds of parents and patients saying like, "Oh my goodness, my kid is undergoing chemotherapy right now or is in the hospital. Can we have one of these for my child?" And so that was really when I started to realize, okay, not only is there a demand for this, but there's so many patients out there who want these, and I really don't want them to have to pay for them. We were able to quadruple our minimum order. I started getting emails from different parents and patients who said that they really wanted a Medi-Teddy, just different testimonials of parents being like, my child was undergoing chemo or things like that. And that's when I really started to recognize that there was a big demand for this. After quadrupling our minimum order, I realized that, okay, I needed to start a 501(c)(3), which I did. And then I also started a business called IV Comfort Solutions LLC. And so what we do now is we really never want the patient to have to buy the Medi-Teddy themselves. Patients can request them or their parents can request them through our website, email us, DM us on Instagram, and then we'll send them a teddy at no cost through our 501(c)(3). We just match the cost of that teddy through grants, fundraising, donations through IV Comfort Solutions, and then use the money that comes in through there to fund the requests. Usually the grants and donations are through the 501(c)(3) side because those can be tax deductible. And then also child life specialists or hospitals or foundations can place orders themselves through IV Comfort Solutions and then give them to children. The ultimate goal is that we really never want the patient to have to pay for it. So that's kind of where we are now. There's over 15,000 Medi-Teddies out there, all 50 US states, 30 countries.
That's amazing. So you started this when you were in fifth grade and you built this business in middle school and high school, and now 15,000 kids around the world are benefiting from your idea. How amazing is that? Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's very cool.
So if people want to donate who are listening, they go to, remind us again?
It's Medi-Teddy Inc., so medi-teddy.org is our 501(c)(3).
Ella, you're an inspiration to so many people. Your work has done a tremendous amount to help 15,000 patients and counting, and hopefully people listening out there with ideas around how they can improve pediatric healthcare will be inspired by what you did at such an early age and perhaps can get going on their idea too.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ella. That's a wrap for today's special segment of the Mighty Parentrepreneurs on A Dose of Optimism. Ella has told me that her mom, Meg, was very helpful in the earliest days of supporting her in the development of Medi-Teddy. And earlier we talked to Aubrey, who shared her story as a parent turned entrepreneur, hoping to make healthcare better for the next set of parents who have to navigate a scary new diagnosis for their child. In the coming months, we will have more segments of the Mighty Parentrepreneurs, featuring more inspiring stories of parent entrepreneurs driving innovation in pediatrics. All right, thank you for joining us for your dose of optimism. Make sure to check out our show notes to get more information about our guests and the work they're doing. Visit our podcast page on the KidsX website to join our podcast community and to learn more about pediatric innovation. Thank you to our sponsors and to our presenting partner, KidsX. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and remember, it takes a village to make sure our kids grow into healthy adults. So volunteer at your local library, help out at the community center, and thank your crossing guard. And if you're so inspired, donate to your local children's hospital. All right, see you next time. The content, views, opinions, and information presented on this podcast do not reflect the views of Children's Hospital Los Angeles or of the sponsors of the podcast. CHLA does not endorse the views, opinions, and information presented on this podcast, and CHLA specifically disclaims any legal liability or responsibility for the podcast content.